Well, welcome. It's great to see you, and thanks for joining me today for this third free class that I've been doing monthly within the Atheopagan community. Today's class is about the Atheopagan Cleric, what it is, what they do, what that means, all that kind of stuff. So, glad to have you aboard, and feel free to jump in with questions whenever you like. You can use the raise hand function so I can see that you have a question. So today's class, as I said, is the Atheopagan Cleric's Path, serving the communities of Earth and humanity. And let's get started. I've got some introductory and caveat things that I start with in each of these classes. I'm Mark, and I do a bunch of different things. I've written books about Atheopaganism. We have a podcast, The Wonder. I like to sing. I write poetry. I'm a ritualist, and I like to tell myself I'm a critical thinker. I hope I am. It's something to aspire to. I work professionally in the conservation field, primarily right now working to protect public lands in California. I'm a lifelong atheist and science enthusiast. I have never believed in the supernatural. I've never seen any evidence to support it. I live about 60 miles north of San Francisco along the California coast in the wine country. And I've spent 37 years celebrating with the Northern American pagan community, even though I have not believed in their gods or in magic the whole time. And then the disclaimer, what I'm not. I am not a guru or a cult leader or a spiritual teacher. I'm just a guy who had some ideas, put them together in an essay. Other people got interested in that. It turned into a book. And a lot of us have come together around those ideas. But I just consider myself to be a content creator within this community. I'm not the boss of anything. I'm not the authority of Atheopaganism. I am far from infallible, as anybody who knows me will explain. Um, and I'm not telling you what to do. Atheopaganism is a path that is very DIY. So it's not like Wicca, where you got to do particular things at particular times because that's what you have to do. Um, the point of Atheopaganism is for us to be happy and fulfilled and to find meaning and joy in living and to pass that around to others. And so you should choose to do the things that you want to do as a part of it. None of it is obligatory or forces you to do anything you don't want to do. Your agency means something to me. I've sometimes described Atheopaganism as religion with agency as opposed to as supplication. The mainstream religions are very much about supplication and obedience to authority. That's not what we're doing here. So today we're going to talk about serving as an Atheopagan cleric. And the first question should be, well, how do you become an Atheopagan cleric, right? An Atheopagan cleric is someone who has been officially ordained by the nonprofit Atheopagan Society, which is a religious nonprofit registered with the federal IRS in the US. And you can become an Atheopagan cleric simply by filling out the contact form on the Society's website and inquiring about becoming a cleric. Like the Universal Life Church, we believe everybody should have the right to officiate at weddings and do other sort of ministerial kinds of things. And so all that we ask is that you endorse the 13 Atheopagan Principles in order to become added to the list and to become an Atheopagan cleric. So a lot of people ask, well, why do you call it that name? And what exactly is this role of being a cleric? And the first answer is the easy one. We call them clerics because it's funny. It's clerics from Dungeons and Dragons. It embraces our nerdy, neurodivergent, geeky nature as science nerds and engineers and neurodivergent people, as so many of us are. Um, I stole this Dungeons and Dragons illustration just to give kind of an idea about what it conjures up. Um, and what it is better defined by what an Atheopagan cleric is not. We don't have a priest class. Being an Atheopagan cleric is not an elevation of status within the community because everybody can be one. You just have to decide that you want to and go through that process. And then you have the legal rights of a member of clergy of a religious organization. But that's confusing to many people because most of the mainstream religions, as well as many pagan traditions, have clergy as sort of an elevation of status, like you're a high priestess, and that means that you're going to have a coven that answers to you and all that kind of stuff. We're not doing any of that here. The the role of the Atheopagan cleric is a service role that you elect to take on in order to serve the earth and the community. It's strictly voluntary, and it's about what you can do for what is around you rather than having people obey you or any of that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that? Okay, hearing none. Going to go on. So, the first part of this is about of the first part of being an Atheopagan cleric is being an Atheopagan, right? Celebrate living, enjoy life, grab life with both hands and really, you know, have the delicious food and the wonderful dancing and the moonlight and the beautiful sunsets and the mountain scenes and ocean scenes and forest experiences and desert wonders. Enjoy the world, enjoy art and culture and people and all the things that can bring us pleasure, and pay attention to what's happening around you in nature so you can be better connected with the natural cycles of the world. One of the first things that we talk about in the sort of how to be an Atheopagan classes is, and we talk about this on the podcast a lot as well, is how paying attention is a really central aspect to having a deeper connection with nature, which is at the core of what Atheopaganism is. Live the Atheopagan principles. We'll spell them out here in a minute, but they're pretty good principles, if I do say so myself. They're ways to be kind and inclusive and to seek justice and to be careful of the earth, and to be thoughtful and critically thinking so that you don't get bamboozled into stuff that doesn't make sense. Honor the four pillars of Atheopaganism, which we'll also talk about in a second. Um, they are the definitions of the sacred within this path. And once again, this is if this works for you, right? If pieces of this don't work for you, don't use them. It's okay. What we do ask is that um, your approach to Atheopaganism be in generally in line with the vibe of what the principles and pillars pursue. That is, it's environmentally caring and it's kind, and it's inclusive. So you can't just sort of strip the guts out of Atheopaganism and turn it into a fascist movement. That wouldn't really be Atheopaganism. But beyond that, um, make it your own. Make it your own. And then find others, because community is great, right? When we hang out with people that are like ourselves, that are interesting and have their own subject areas of interest, um, we can have wonderful experiences. Um, I know that one of the attendees here and I went to the Sun Tree retreat back in 2024. And it's just a great time with some really marvelous people to be in person together and enjoy. So, look for others that you think that this path might be useful to or appealing to. And I don't mean that in a proselytizing kind of way, because that ain't our vibe at all. What I mean is, most people aren't aware that this exists. If we make them aware that it exists, then they can choose whether they want some or not. It's up to them. But, having conversations with people can lead to interesting results, in my experience. So let's talk about those four pillars. What is sacred to an atheist pagan? The world, life, specifically the biosphere, but generally the whole cosmos, all the way out to the microwave background and all the way down to the quantum states. This is a miraculous, strange, interesting, endlessly fascinating world. And we get to spend this tiny little eye blink of time in it. And we are gifted with the capacity to understand at least some of it, right? Which is amazing. It's something really to celebrate. The sacred is that which is to be celebrated and revered, right? So the top of the list is the world. And next is love, because for humans, and we believe other mammals, love is what kind of heals our wounds, um, helps us support one another through hard times, builds joy between people, and is the source of a great deal of creative energy and effort. Truth. Truth matters. And this was one of the founding axioms when I first started writing my Atheopagan essay. Um, it was more important to me to have a position that was likely to be the truth about the various gods and goddesses of paganism than it was for me to fit in. I believe that adherence to what is likely to be true and constant interrogation of what you've concluded is likely to be true is a healthy path. It keeps us from getting bamboozled. And then finally, beauty or joy, that swelling feeling inside you when something is just so happy, so beautiful, so, a magnificent landscape, for example. One of the things that capitalism does is it tends to define everything by what its monetary worth is. And I'm here to say that just because something is beautiful, just because the desert is beautiful, does not is enough. It doesn't need to have some sort of utility to be worthy of being saved and protected and cherished. So that then brings us to the Atheopagan principles, which are more about ways of living, right? And I'm not going to go into all of these, but you can see by what they are, and I'm sure you've seen them before, that what they are is happiness inducing, kindness inducing, thoughtfulness inducing principles for living. And they are approaches that I believe enrich the tiny time that we get to live. Um, that said, these are principles that I developed for myself because Atheopaganism was originally something I just put together for me. I didn't think anybody else was going to be interested. This whole community that's developed has been this real joyful discovery for me. But if there are some of these that don't feel quite right to you, then maybe you rename them or you change what they are or something like that. Once again, as long as you stay within that general vibe of being kind and socially conscious and critical thinking and skeptical and caring about the earth. So one of the things that we do as Atheopagans is make altars, but we don't call them altars. We call them focuses. And the reason for that is that to me, an altar implies worship or sacrifice. And neither of those are things that we're doing with a focus. What we're doing is we're laying out a set of objects that are meaningful to us in some way, that have some kind of story associated with them. And then we work with them in a ritual context, like lighting candles or incense or tying knots or braiding ribbons or whatever it is we do in a ritual, in order to go through a transformative ritual process. And I talked about that in the last class, which was about rituals, which is up on YouTube, and you can go and see that class as well. Celebrate the cycle of nature, the wheel of the year, and do it in a way that is consistent with where you live. I live in kind of a Mediterranean climate on the California coast, very different than someone who lives in Vermont or in Florida. Creating the holidays of your wheel of the year and naming them what you want to name them and associating them with the meanings you want to associate them with is a part of the whole deal here. Unlike Wicca or kind of mainstream neo-paganism, we're not trying to live a wheel of the year that's rooted in Great Britain. Instead, we are working to be connected with the natural world, and that means observing a cycle of holidays that are consistent with what's happening around us in the world. So next thing in being an Atheopagan cleric, you start by just being an Atheopagan, living this path, this way of life, conducting yourself according to the principles in relation to other people. But then the next part, we start to move into service. Serve the earth. Show up for the earth and do it in every way you possibly can, whether it's minimizing plastic use, driving electric, not buying toxic chemical cleaners and those kinds of things, adjusting your diet, whatever it is that you feel is the thing that you can do for the planet, do that. Minimize your footprint. Support advocates and allies, and that can mean organizations. There are many great conservation organizations. I work for one. Or it can mean allies in your local community that are advocating for the earth as well, and for other important causes. Vote. May not feel like it does much, but believe me, they wouldn't be trying to take away our power to vote as much as they are if it wasn't influential. If they wouldn't care if it didn't have an impact. Speak out. Write letters to the editor. Call into news shows and air your views. If you feel so inclined, start a podcast about local politics in your region. You'd be surprised at how much attention you can grab and how much influence you can have just by being one of the few people that chooses to speak out. Finally, and this may not seem like it's directly related to showing up for the earth, but it absolutely is, defend the marginalized. Defend LGBTQ people, defend Indigenous people, defend BIPOC people, defend people that are under siege by the powers of conformity and racism and capitalism and empire. Defend them, because those of us who are not marginalized like me are tremendously privileged in that. And there's no particular reason why it shouldn't be people like me that get targeted. It's just that history didn't work out that way. That privilege conducts a responsibility. And I think that part of what we will learn as we move forward in history is that a lot of the learning that we need to have as a species is held by people who are marginalized in terms of how to live together, to relate with one another, to relate with the planet, all of those things. Those are important things that will be snuffed out if the marginalized are snuffed out. It is so important for us to stand up for our fellows who are not in positions of privilege. So next step after serving the earth is to serve humanity, because we all live surrounded by lots of other people, and there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of neglect, and there's a lot of abuse. And each of us in our own small way can do something to make things better. One way that you can do this as an Atheopagan cleric is you can officiate rites of passage, right? You can uh, do birthing and naming and welcoming ceremonies for babies or foster children or adopted kids or whatever it is, to welcome them into a family and give them a name and um, welcome them into the world for the ride that they are about to take. You can do rites of passage into young adulthood, or into full adulthood at the end of the teens. You can do hand fasting ceremonies, which are weddings. This is the only one that has a legal stipulation about who can actually sign a marriage license. But if you are an Atheopagan cleric, you have that power. You can do it. You can also do a dissolution ceremony for a relationship that's no longer working for people. You can induct people into elderhood as they grow gray and old and get ready for the final phase of their lives. You can do funerals, memorials, working with the dying. You can do um, burial ceremonies, or pre-cremation ceremonies, or whatever that is. All of those are things that, as a member of clergy, as a cleric, you are suited to do. And you can help design these rituals with the people that you are providing them for, so that it's meaningful for them. And then take on that role. Find a really great set of robes or something that you feel great about wearing, and then and lead the ritual. And there are other things, graduations, lots of other, kinds of moments in people's lives that we like to celebrate. So, feel free to lead those things. And next, you can commit to serve. And there are a variety of ways to do that. Prison outreach is one. Um, it's, people who are incarcerated are being deliberately made miserable by our culture. And they putting aside the question of whether that is an appropriate response to misbehavior in some way in our culture. There are people that we do have to keep away from other people because they're dangerous, and that's unfortunate. But a huge proportion of people who are incarcerated are being made miserable unjustly. And and many of them are practicing various kinds of paganism in their imprisoned setting. I have a friend who does prison work at San Quentin, and they have an amazing tradition there. And she is very proud of the work that they all do together. So that's one that you can think about. It takes a while. I think you have to get bonded. You have to apply to the facility where you want to serve and go through some steps. But it's something that you can consider, and it's a tremendously positive form of service. The next is hospital or hospice work. And this is also a place where there's a lot of demand, especially among the atheists and secular people, because they don't want, a Catholic coming into their uh, hospital room and doing a bunch of Catholic stuff. They're not interested in that. But the uh, the role that a non-theist can play, or that a pagan can play for a pagan practitioner, can be very useful for people that are ill, and having lengthy hospital stays, or who are dying and maybe either in the hospital or in hospice. There is a tremendous kindness to extending yourself to people that are in those kinds of conditions. And it's something that's a very worthy path to pursue. And then there is peer counseling, which is something that we can do, um, without getting the agreement of an institution to do that. There's a lot of suffering around us. There's a lot of people that are mentally suffering. There's a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. Um, and we, as people who are cultivating the art of being happy, have something to offer to people that are suffering in that way. It is really important that you ask yourself the question early on, is this something deeper and more complicated than I can address as a non-professional? You know, it may be that the kindest and best thing that you can do for someone is to say, I want to hook you up with these mental health resources because you need to talk to somebody that really is trained in how to do this. That's perfectly legitimate. But there are a lot of people that just need an ear. You know, they just need to be listened to. Um, and not necessarily for advice, not for you to solve the problems, but just to show kindness and that you see them and that they're important and you care about their existence. That makes a huge difference. And I speak from my own mental health background, having been very seriously depressed for most of my life, until we finally got the meds right, which was miraculous. Um, it's made There have been times when just having someone to talk to has made all the difference. And those were times often when I had driven away virtually everyone else in my life. So the stick-to-itiveness and the courage of those people to approach me and want to listen to what I had to say is something that I'll always be incredibly grateful for. And I encourage that as you go through this process, you find the joy in it. Even very sad circumstances can be beautiful. Um, I mean, terrible but beautiful in their stark reality, right? I think of a lot of death experiences, and it's so devastating to lose someone. But at the same time, if it's done well, there can be a, a real beauty in kind of ushering them into non-existence in a way that's kind and supportive and generous and loving. And afterwards, what we remember is that it was very sad, but it was done beautifully. Ritual is play, ultimately, and service is often very joyful. So invoke your creativity, use those skills that we talked about um, in the last class to develop rituals that are unique and fun and adventurous. And you'll enjoy this path of the Atheopagan Cleric. I've been doing it now for 5 years since we founded the society, and um, I'm not perfect at it all the time, but I feel that it adds to my life to think of myself as an Atheopagan cleric. And sometimes I have to ask myself, well, what would an Atheopagan cleric do? And it's not necessarily what I would naturally do, but usually it's a better answer. So I encourage you to explore this. And if you feel inspired to take this on. And questions.